Thank you all for coming today to share this presentation on advanced care planning. The focus of our presentation really is, and you will see this as we go along, is helping people to understand that the advanced care plan is designed and should be designed with its various parts to help make sure that the person for whom the plan is crafted is represented. Their needs, their wishes are represented until the very end, that they are entitled to have agency and for everyone around them to understand what it is they need and want, and how to support them to the very last breath. So it is, as we have before, I'm sorry, this is jumping ahead of me. The second slide is always yours to customize.
Wendy, it's Kathy Bowers.
Yes, would
Hi,
you?
Kathy.
Hi, I've been trying to get to you, figure out hopefully. I want to go ahead and pay the balance.
Kathy, we really need for you
the
to.
credit card
Yeah.
over the phone?
Yes, I'm fine with,
Okay.
sure, thank you.
Okay.
Hope I caught you at a good time.
Yeah, yep. All right. Tell me what because it'll save me time. I can click.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. So we will start again. The second slide, as you know, is always yours to customize. The third slide is the agenda. And in this case, the deck takes about an hour, and it focuses on the POLST documents, also in some states called the MOLST, physician's orders for advanced care, and the DNR, and what the differences are, when they're used, why, how, when, and by whom, and the patient's rights and how to protect the patient's wishes, a few tips for peace of mind. Now, I should mention here that when you open up this deck yourself and you're preparing to give it, you will notice that there are two stories that go along with this, and we'll cover them in a few minutes, but they are Word documents. One is called Charlie's Story and one is called Margaret's Story. And they are stories of one in Charlie's story is a time when his agency was not respected and his wishes were not respected. And then the other story, which is Margaret's story, of when her daughter, Ellen, knew all of her wishes, and even in the face of some concerns expressed by her doctors, even some pushback, Ellen stood up for her mother, Margaret. So I just wanted to bring that up right now because both of those stories, dovetail, I think, pretty nicely with the agenda. So we use this image of an umbrella because under advanced care planning, there are lots of independent documents. As you are probably already familiar, there are living wills, there's a POA, a power of attorney for healthcare, the POLST form, and the DNR forms. Under that umbrella, and because there is only about an hour that any organization typically gives for speakers, and because too, the most confusion exists around the POLST and the DNR documents, this presentation focuses on those two. We may at some point, and I would love your feedback on this, maybe it makes sense for us to refine this and go into the living will and the POA and take out some other things that, you may advise are not important. I'm totally open to your ideas. In fact, I really welcome them. I think we are better together. And so I'm just here. We are focusing on the most misunderstood. And actually, I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I developed this particular deck is because there's a senior community here in the Chicago area, and the executive director is a friend of mine. And he actually asked me if I could develop this because he felt that there was so much confusion among their residents, and the senior community requires that they have these documents in place. And even the POLST document, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. I'm really shocked, frankly, that this particular community requires a POLST document, because typically that's only used for the last 6 months. So, and you may come across this yourself. So again, that's, evidence of further misunderstanding. I took his request, though, as a real opportunity to try to help make a difference and to help not only his residents, but then, of course, the people that you support. So fundamentally, what we start with is trying to find out, first and foremost, every patient is entitled to, every person, I should say, is entitled to make a decision about who do I want to make care decisions for me when I can't? What kind of medical treatment do I want to have or I don't want to have? How comfortable physically or emotionally or spiritually do I want to be? How do I want people to treat me? How do I want my loved ones? What do I want my loved ones to know? Everyone is entitled to decide how much information is actually shared or not shared. And so all of these are tough topics. And really, this is where so many professional advocates have such an important role to play. It is to help people bring those topics to the fore and discuss them, even to think about them independently on their own, or as or together with their families. The main things that we want to ask of people when they name a medical power of attorney is, who really gets you? Who will put you, your wishes, your needs first before their own, and who has the courage to stand up for you? As I think we covered last week, a lot of people choose their nearest and dearest, a spouse, a daughter, or someone else who is close to them. But that may at times be such an emotional role for that other person that they may not be able to speak up for someone else, or they may not have the kind of empathy that's really required to put someone else's needs before their own. So one first idea that we can offer is to consider naming 2 surrogates, not just one, in part because it can be a lonely, fraught, emotional kind of experience. 2 heads, and we always say this, right? 2 heads are better than one. And it's also very helpful to have a backup just in case the person who is needed, maybe in a crisis, isn't actually in touch. What if the person who has power of attorney is on safari in Africa and isn't although I know we're all connected by cell phone everywhere. But there are times when people just aren't available for, travel or any other number of reasons. So to have a backup is actually a good insurance policy. One of the things that we emphasize, and you'll see this throughout this deck, is that conversations are critical. All of these topics that we've talked about so far, and not actually very many so far, require really good, in-depth, non-judgmental, sincere conversations of the heart. We are always happy to recommend 5 wishes. For this, when I gave this presentation at the senior center that requested that I develop this, I actually went to 5 wishes, and I had ordered 50 copies of their little print booklet. And for you, if you do, it was very reasonable. I can't remember what it was, maybe $1 or so a piece. And they came in a nice little box. And I gave them to everybody in the audience. For you, if you decided to do that, it would be a good way to clip your business card. Now, I know that these conversations may not be comfortable even for you, but if they are, obviously I'm a big fan of advocates taking on this role, but it's not for everybody. But this is one way to sort of start that conversation even before someone leaves the presentation. They've got a really good, solid sort of direction and support from you from the get-go. And they may not ever call you. They may feel that they can do it on their own, of course, but it's really, really helpful. So the next part of this is we launch into, well, what is a DNR? It stands for Do Not Resuscitate. And this is just a really one-page summary explaining what that means. And in effect, sort of the main message here is that the person will not receive CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, cardio, heart, pulmonary, lungs, resuscitation, revival, if you wish, if the heart or breathing stop. So these are only written by a doctor after explaining, and you hope the doctor explains the pros and cons of CPR for the patient. And it's usually when someone is seriously ill. They've had a terrible diagnosis and they're fragile. This does not mean, however, that anyone else cannot have a DNR. I mean, anybody who may fear that if they're ever in a terrible car accident, and they might want to put it on their phones where in case of emergency information is stored. It's completely, obviously, up to every person, but it's typically a topic that's covered when someone is seriously ill. So there are 2 forms of the DNR. One is that a person does receive any care that eases pain and suffering, but no CPR or other emergency measures are given. And then the other is a DNR CC called arrest, requires that the patient receive standard medical care if the heart or lungs stop or shut down. And I just saw that there's a little typo here, so I'll get that corrected. I forgot the word if. Now, a DNR does not mean do not treat, only the resuscitation measures. And a lot of doctors, too, will explain that DNR it can also cause harm to someone in that resuscitation process. In chest compressions, for example, ribs can be cracked, and it can be really tough on the body. Being intubated, of course, has its own risks, and being administered drugs. So the decisions that are part of this is whether an absence of, if somebody is suffering from, and you can tell that I'm really hesitating at delivering this because I personally have a hard time. I don't know if I personally will ever be able to give this presentation again. And I'm just being completely honest because having been through this, I have to say recently with my mom. And I think that's the hardest part of this is that this is really a tough topic. So I applaud you if you can do it much better than me, and you probably can. So getting back to it is decisions to make with their doctor. Whether or not IV fluids or antibiotics or feeding tube or nutrition would be still desired. So I think is really an odd wrinkle, is that in some states, there is a separate DNR form for out of hospital care and another one for in hospital care. And so the takeaway from this is, as a presenter, you probably want to know what that case is in your state so that you can bring it up knowledgeably. Actually, this, even in your state, if there's only one DNR that's necessary, it covers both inpatient and out of the hospital care. If somebody travels and say they and we used this example last week, they go to a warm climate for the winter, it's really helpful to know what the laws are in that state, if there's any chance at all that they're going to be needing treatment. Or if someone is seriously ill and they've got they know they have to have a DNR, and they're fulfilling their bucket list travel goals. It's just a good thing to be aware of, to know, to be prepared, and to know what the rules are in different states. And then, of course, it's always helpful to take pictures of these documents and have them on the phone. And for anybody, obviously, who has the power of attorney, that these documents should be on their phones as well. And this is a lot to handle. And frankly, this is where advocates, even in just all this paperwork, can be such a help in making sure that everyone is fully informed and fully supplied with everything they need. So some things to think about for your DNR orders are, do you wait until you're seriously ill, as doctors, tend to do, or should you have it ready just in case? Should you wear a bracelet showing your DNR status? And who will you share your DNR with? Who will speak for you when you can't? And again, going back to this issue as well, how would CPR affect your body, and what could be the potential damage? And where and how will you store your DNR so others can find it in an emergency? And then what if you want to change your mind? People should always know that it's okay to change their minds. And it's just, if anybody changes their mind, the process needs to be repeated in terms of the logistics. Who has it? Where do they store it? How is it? How are the people who have the power of attorney, how are they updated? So here I wanted to bring up Charlie's story. And you have, as I said, the Word document. In a nutshell, this is a story of Charlie who had ALS, and his wife cared for him for a couple of years, and he declined pretty rapidly and pretty steadily. He was at home, but he had emergency care at least once a month, the EMTs were pulling up to their home to take him. And he was being treated actually at the local VA. This is a true story. All the paperwork was fully executed, and his wife, Carol, she was the only had power of attorney. And finally, in one emergency visit at the VA, his heart and lungs did stop, and they were preparing to call his time of death because he had a DNR. And Carol got on a chair and screamed at the top of her lungs in the hospital that she was not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. You can't let him go. You have to bring him back. The staff was completely unnerved. Patients around them were upset because she was very, very loud and relentless. Finally, they did resuscitate him, and he lived for a few more months. That was a case of his wife putting her own needs before his. And that's not supposed to happen. So a POLST, as I mentioned, is usually reserved for people who have only 6 months left to live. Or about, of course, it's not an exact science. And typically, of course, that's when hospice starts, and or at the very least, they're experiencing or getting palliative care, we hope. And it is a way for people to express their needs and wants until the very end of life. And as I mentioned to you, this senior, and this was an independent living, they had requested that everyone fill out a POLST. And in that particular facility, so it was the DNR, the POLST, the living will, the power of attorney, all of those documents, they had them put in a plastic bag to put in their freezers. So the EMTs, which only came from the local hospital, all knew to go to the freezer, grab their paperwork, and go. Pretty efficient process. However, and as I said, I did not argue with them about this, but did take this opportunity to help them understand what the proper role of a POLST is. And it's one of those documents that ideally happens between the patient and their doctor with a good conversation. And I've heard various reports about how long doctors are able to have that conversation. And again, going back to the 5 wishes and the role of advocate to support this, it's very it's very helpful to have, I think, an advocate involved. So, Stephanie, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Going back to, also the other thing is it's very helpful to have this printed on a neon paper, pink, orange, yellow, because actually, at least in Illinois, EMTs have been trained to look for that neon paper as a cue for the health status of the person that they're coming in for. So there are 3 types of POLST forms. There's full, selective, and comfort. And it's pretty self-explanatory here, and you can go over this when you're in your presentation. And again, all of these things can be changed based on changes in health status. Last year, we had a POLST for my mom, and my sister had her power of attorney, and so the patient doesn't have to change it. My sister changed the POLST for my mother as mom's decline became very evident that she had zero quality of life left. So my sister Nancy did make some changes, and she just made sure that, you know, everybody had them, and everybody really appreciated actually having a little bit of extra direction. So there are pitfalls with the POLST, and unsurprisingly, the first one is that there's not enough or any conversation with the doctor. It's and I have heard that doctors are, you know, they don't have the time, but it's not exactly the most comfortable conversation to have. And so again, this is where advocates can help, be so helpful. Or that the POLST forms can't be found when they're needed. And also that the POLSTs are not updated when the health condition changes. So in that last 6 months, the care conditions or the health conditions can change pretty rapidly, and it does require paying attention to detail, updating them as needed, and getting them all to the people who need to have them. And then the second point is if you could find them. So here's some great resources for finding good information. And because we have a handout that you will be able to email to everybody in your audience, this will be part of the packet that they'll get from you. So wrapping up, what do these things have in common? And that is it's the conversations that really matter. Now here's another story, which is an example of really good conversations. Margaret knew she had cancer. I think it started as breast cancer, but then spread. And her mom, Ellen, Margaret, was the mother of Ellen, who happened to be the chief nursing officer at a community hospital. So Ellen and Margaret had many good conversations, and Margaret was adamant she was not going to die in a hospital. She was going to be at home, and people were going to come and visit her, and it was going to be peaceful and calm, and she did not want anything she just really didn't want any life-saving measures, because she knew that additional chemo or radiation would just be a kind of hell that she did not want to experience. So Ellen, being in the hospital, was particularly sort of vulnerable to the doctors, her mom's doctors, that she actually ran into on occasion, or she went to all of her mom's appointments with her too, and there was some follow-up care, but they were constantly pressuring her to change her mother's mind. Like, let us try this. We know we can try this. And they were very well-intentioned. But as Ellen said to me when she was going through this, she said, I'm just going to tell you, doctors have a really hard time giving up. Yes, there is always a treatment, but so many doctors tend to think of it as a personal failure when they lose a patient. And it's really hard for them sometimes to see a patient make a decision that is short of a full, flat-out war, in this case, against cancer. So, and Ellen actually even said to me, look, if I hadn't been a nurse and if I hadn't been used to standing up to doctors, I don't know if I would have remained strong. So I thought that this was a very good example of a person who was very close to her mom, obviously, but she was a fierce advocate for what her mother wanted, and she always kept her mother's wishes front and center. So this is just another plug, if you will, for 5 wishes, and a way that you can, at this point, if you happen to get those 5 wishes, where you can pass them out to people in your audience with your business card attached, and then you can open it up for conversation afterwards. And I actually have to say that when I did present this at the Senior Center, there was a really lot of conversation. So people were quiet during the presentation, but we did have a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of ideas. So that was a positive. So this is your last slide, of course, where you can put your photo, your smiling self up there, and your name and your company name and how to contact you, and to let people know that you speak on other topics, and to just contact you. Okay, so let me I'm going to stop the recording